The knife flashes, and your childhood ends in an instant. Pain radiates through your body, but worse is the silence. An empty, echoing silence that tells you you'll never be the same again. The air is thick with the smell of blood and herbs. You're dizzy, gasping, and as your body writhes, you realize something has been taken that can never be returned. You're no longer a boy. You're not a man. You're something else entirely. In the Middle Ages, this made you both despised and desired. Mocked by crowds, yet trusted by kings. Scorned by priests, yet given power over empires. This is what life was truly like as a medieval eunuch. Imagine being taken from your home as a child. Perhaps your parents sold you because famine had emptied their fields. Perhaps you were captured in war, dragged across mountains and seas, or perhaps you were chosen for your voice, the promise of a sound so angelic that it could echo in cathedrals forever. But before you could even understand, your body was claimed. Castration in the Middle Ages was rarely an act of choice. It was an operation forced upon boys, usually between the ages of 6 and 12. There were two main procedures. Some involved removing only the testicles, others the entire organ. Both were dangerous, both were agonizing. Without anesthesia, you might be held down while a blade, sometimes sharp, sometimes little more than a heated knife, did its work. Cloths soaked in vinegar or wine attempted to clean the wound. Herbal mixtures promised to stop bleeding, but often they did little more than sting. Survival was uncertain. In Byzantium, where eunuchs were bred for service to the emperor, some accounts suggest nearly half of boys did not survive the mutilation. In Islamic caliphates, captured boys often underwent the procedure on long slave routes, where infection killed countless victims. Even in Europe, where castration for choir singing became common later, mortality was frighteningly high. And if you survived, you woke to a body transformed. The pain lingered for weeks, the swelling, the fever, the dizziness. These were your new companions. But beyond the pain lay something deeper, the knowledge that your future was no longer your own. You were no longer destined for a farmer's plow, a soldier's sword, or a father's hearth. You were set apart, molded for a strange and uncertain path. As the wounds heal, the world begins to reshape your destiny. You are no longer seen as an ordinary boy. You are now a eunuch, and in the eyes of rulers, this makes you both useful and safe. In Byzantium, eunuchs occupied roles at the very heart of the empire. They served as chamberlains in the palaces of Constantinople, guarding the emperor's private rooms and managing the complex rituals of court life. Their unique status, unable to father heirs, made them trusted bureaucrats. A nobleman might betray the emperor for the sake of his children, but a eunuch had no bloodline to advance. That absence made them, ironically, more dependable. Some rose far higher. The Byzantine general Narses, a eunuch in the service of Emperor Justinian during the 6th century, commanded entire armies. It was he who helped reconquer Italy for the empire. Imagine the sight. A man mocked for his lack of manhood, now directing legions of hardened soldiers. His orders carried the weight of Rome itself. In the Islamic caliphates, eunuchs were often found in the most intimate places of power, the harems. They guarded the secluded women of sultans and caliphs, controlling who could enter and who could not. But their duties went beyond watchfulness. Many became confidants and advisors, knowing secrets no ordinary man could ever learn. Proximity to rulers gave them a quiet but potent influence. In Europe, their role was different. Within the church, eunuchs were often prized for their voices. Castrated boys with musical talent became castrati, whose haunting angelic songs filled great cathedrals. Their sound was so pure that congregations wept, hearing what they believed was the voice of heaven itself. Whether in Byzantium, the caliphates, or Christian Europe, eunuchs lived in contradiction, treated as less than human in public, yet indispensable at the centers of power. The knife may have cut you only once, but its shadow follows you forever. Your body is no longer governed by the same rhythms as other men. Without the production of testosterone, your appearance begins to shift in ways that set you apart for life. Your beard never grows in full, leaving your face smooth even as others your age sprout whiskers. Your voice remains higher, clearer, sometimes carrying an eerie quality that others whisper about. Your frame, too, changes. Many eunuchs grew tall, their limbs long and thin, their chests soft, their skin unusually pale. Fat gathered around the hips rather than the shoulders, giving some an appearance society called unnatural. Bones weakened without male hormones to strengthen them, leaving many prone to fractures later in life. And then there were the hidden afflictions. Scars often caused chronic pain. Some eunuchs experienced urinary complications. Others developed infections that returned again and again. In rare cases, the surgery caused so much internal damage that walking itself became a lifelong struggle. But even when your health was stable, you carried the constant reminder of what you lacked. In a world that defined manhood by virility, strength, and heirs, you were excluded from it all. You would never know the legacy of fatherhood, never claim a bloodline, never boast of sons. Society never let you forget. Crowds mocked eunuchs as weak, effeminate, or half-men. Whispers followed them in markets and churches, and yet, paradoxically, people also feared them. After all, this half-man might hold the emperor's seal, the sultan's trust, or the pope's choirs in his command. Your body bore scars that no clothing could hide, but even more lasting were the scars carved deep into your sense of self. To walk the streets as a eunuch was to carry humiliation like a cloak. You were stared at, ridiculed, whispered about. In taverns, men mocked eunuchs as cowards or freaks of nature. Satirical poems and plays painted them as weak, lustless, even cursed. In the villages and marketplaces of medieval Europe, you might be laughed at openly, pointed out to children as a warning of what happens when a man is unmade. But step inside a palace, and everything changed. In the Byzantine Empire, eunuchs became some of the most powerful political figures in history. Basil Lecapenos, himself a eunuch, rose in the 10th century to control imperial policy for decades. Though he could never be emperor, he effectively ruled as kingmaker, manipulating succession, forging alliances, and bending the empire to his will. His enemies mocked his body, but they feared his mind. Eunuchs thrived in such positions precisely because their mutilation removed suspicion. They had no sons to inherit power, no family dynasty to build. To emperors and sultans, that made them safer than any ambitious nobleman. When rulers looked for loyalty, they turned to eunuchs. In the Islamic world, eunuchs were equally vital. Some held the keys to harems, controlling access to the most intimate chambers of sultans and caliphs. This proximity gave them knowledge others could only dream of. Knowledge of palace intrigues, secrets whispered behind curtains, even succession plots. So it was a paradox. Outside the palace walls, shame and ridicule clung to you. Inside, power and privilege flowed through your hands. You lived in two worlds at once, despised in one, feared in the other. For a eunuch, the knife had taken your manhood, but it had also handed you influence few ordinary men could ever touch. Religion had much to say about eunuchs, but rarely with one clear voice. In Christianity, the paradox ran deep. On one hand, Scripture seemed to honor them. The Gospel of Matthew speaks of those who made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven. The Ethiopian eunuch, baptized by Philip in the book of Acts, became one of the first recorded Christian converts. To many believers, these passages suggested a kind of purity, a devotion free from lust. But as centuries passed, the church drew hard lines. Self-castration was condemned as a sin against God's creation. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD forbade anyone who had mutilated themselves from becoming a priest. Yet the church also relied on eunuchs. In monasteries and choirs, castrati preserved their angelic voices for liturgy. Their songs, haunting and otherworldly, filled cathedrals with what many called the sound of heaven. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. In Islam, eunuchs were not forbidden. Instead, they were employed in roles of great trust. Caliphs and sultans relied on them as guardians of harems, believing that their condition removed temptation. Some were even entrusted with holy sites. For centuries, eunuchs served as keepers of the Kaaba in Mecca, responsible for guarding Islam's most sacred sanctuary. That trust gave them a spiritual legitimacy found nowhere else. Legal codes reflected these tensions. In some regions, eunuchs were barred from inheritance or marriage. In others, they were granted privileges of court rank. Byzantine law sometimes limited them, sometimes elevated them, depending on the emperor's will. Faith called them both pure and impure. Law treated them both as diminished and as indispensable. And in that constant contradiction, Eunuchs carved out their strange place between sin and sanctity, between punishment and power. Strip away the politics, the palaces, the choirs, and what remains is the ordinary rhythm of existence. What did it mean to live day to day as a eunuch? For many, it meant loneliness. Medieval society defined men by their families, by their wives and children, by the line of heirs who carried on their name. But you? That was denied. You could not father sons, could not pass on land, could not leave behind a bloodline. To some, you were incomplete. To yourself, you might feel like a shadow of what you once were. Meals were eaten where your rank permitted. As a low servant, you dined in the kitchens or communal barracks, eating bread and stews beside other attendants. As a court official, your meals might be rich, roasted meats, dates, spiced wine, but always in the company of power, never in the intimacy of family. Work filled your hours. Some eunuchs swept palace corridors, others carried scrolls, managed records, or trained in diplomacy. A select few directed armies or oversaw treasuries. But whatever your station, your body set you apart. No beard, a strange voice, an unfamiliar shape, reminders at every turn. And at night, nights were long. For some, prayer filled the silence. Eunuchs often turned to religion, seeking meaning in a life reshaped by force. Others wrote poetry, their words heavy with longing. Many buried themselves in duty, convincing themselves that service was identity. But the inner struggle never faded. Were you a man? Something in between? Or something outside humanity altogether? Society gave no clear answer. Day after day, your life was a negotiation between usefulness and isolation, between privilege and emptiness. And through it all, you endured. Centuries have passed, but the memory of eunuchs lingers as one of history's strangest contradictions. On one level, they were victims, children mutilated before they had any chance to decide their fate. Their bodies bore scars. Their lives were stripped of ordinary joys, their names often forgotten in the shadows of kings and sultans. They were mocked, pitied, and cast aside as curiosities. And yet, their influence is impossible to erase. Eunuchs held empires together when dynasties faltered. They guarded the secrets of harems and palaces, acting as the silent gatekeepers of power. They whispered in the ears of emperors, guided the hands of generals, and in some cases like Basil Lekapenos of Byzantium or Narses before him, they ruled more completely than the monarchs they served. Even in the realm of faith, their presence was profound. Their voices, lifted in song, became the soundtrack of Europe's cathedrals. Their service at the Kaaba in Mecca lasted centuries, binding them to one of the holiest sites in the world. The paradox is haunting. Those who were considered broken shaped the course of civilizations. Those denied fatherhood shaped kingdoms instead. Stripped of manhood, they became something else, symbols of both cruelty and power. History forces us to see them as more than victims, yet never quite heroes. They were both humiliated and exalted, erased and immortalized. And so their legacy is a mirror. It reflects not only their suffering, but also the brutal logic of a world where power demanded sacrifice. To live as a eunuch in the Middle Ages was to walk between two worlds. You were never fully accepted, never entirely whole. Yet you were never powerless either. You were scarred, silenced, and yet unforgettable. Empires needed you, even as society mocked you. Faith both condemned and embraced you. You bore shame, but you carried secrets. And in the end, your existence shaped history in ways no ordinary life ever could. Could you endure that life? Could you survive the knife, the loneliness, the paradox of humiliation and power? Think carefully, because the world of the eunuch was not survival. It was transformation. For more hidden truths of the medieval world, subscribe and return next time.